What's my purpose?
Am I here?
Where did I come from?
How come there's so much evil in the world?
I'm scared.
How do I know what's true anymore?
Hey kids, welcome to the first in the series on Dad Answers the Tough Questions. Like I mentioned in my previous video, if you didn't see it, this is going to be a new series, and I've been talking about this for quite a while. Finally bringing it to fruition here, where we're going to start talking. I've already pre-recorded 3 episodes, and the first episode is, how do I determine what's true when there's so much information out there? So I'll be joined with Abdu Murray, and we just talk about truth, and if there really is truth, and how do we discover it, and what do we do about it, and all that. So I'm going to keep these episodes about 20 minutes long. So hopefully, you get enough answered that you want to know more. So let's go ahead and join my conversation with Abdu. All right, so let's just get started here. This new series that I've been talking about and thinking about in my head for actually a few years, but I just haven't got around to doing it. And so when I met you at our church, you came and spoke at our church about a year ago, I think. Yep. I just appreciated your heart, but also you're very learned. And so you have a unique set of gifts, I think, where you're very smart, but you also don't walk around like you're smart. You're relatable. And so that's one of the things I really liked about you. And so this new series that I have is Dad Answers the Tough Questions. It's not stump dad,
Right.
Because that'd be far too easy, at least for me, to stump me.
Me too.
And so we're not after that. We're after just being able to ask honest questions. And one of the things that has kind of put it on my heart is I hear so much about our younger generation being depressed and having no hope and not, and my heart's kind of always been for the younger generation. And that's why I started Dad, How Do I? Because I wanted to help people learn how to do a lot of things I learned the hard way. And so ultimately this thing I hope is just us being open, honest, sharing the struggles we might have had along the way. And as people tune in over time, we get a chance to know each other. They get a chance to know you, get a chance to know me on a deeper level. I think people kind of know me, but I end up saying God bless you at the end of my videos. But a lot of people say God bless you, and what does that really mean? And so what I'm hoping with this series is to get more into my faith and talk about why I even do what I do. And so anyway, just to kind of kick this off, I don't want to do all the talking because I really want people to hear what you have to say, but I wanted to kind of give an introduction for what this is going to look like. So the first question that I think we want to deal with, and as we go on with this series, I want people to feel free to ask that question too, and then maybe we'll talk about that question. So
that'd be great.
We're starting off this one, and I kind of chose it because I know you have a book coming out too that kind of talks about this, and it is a thing that we're dealing with in our society with AI. And how do you know what what is true and what's not? Let's see, what did I say here? How do I determine what's true when there's so much information out there? AI, deepfakes, culture of distrust, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll let you speak, Abdu, and we'll go on from there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I appreciate the tone with which you've always done all of your posts, and the offering advice, but also through a lens of humility. And of course, this series, I'm honored to be a part of it. This is a great fundamental question for this series. What is truth? How do you know it amidst all the information that's out there? Well, the first thing I think we need to establish is that objective truth actually exists. It's not a matter of just perspectives. We all have our versions of the truth. And we hear this phrase all the time, let me tell you my truth. What we mean is my perspective. And the true experience we have that we're offering to somebody it's valid. It's okay. Like what your perspective is something that you have in fact experienced. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily true, but it is something you have truly experienced, if that makes a difference in terms of understanding these things. So what we want to know, though, relative to your question, is how can we know what is objectively true? And what I mean by objectively true is something that's true regardless of who believes it or disbelieves it. Like, for example, the world is round. It's round even if no one believes it, and it's round even if everyone believes it. It's not dependent on human opinion. And that's what we're talking about here. Now, someone can say, well, all truth is relative to the perspectives, but you see there's a problem there. When you say things like all truth is relative and there is no such thing as an objective truth, well, the statement you just made has to be objectively true in order for you to make it. So to say that truth is all relative is a statement that isn't itself relative, and it has to therefore be true. So we already know, just by virtue of how truth works, that truth is a real thing. It is something that is out there. It's that which corresponds to reality. So the truth does exist. The question now becomes then, in a world where we have so much information and so many opinions, how do we understand where that truth actually comes from? And so there are multiple different tests for truth. What I've discovered in my own journey, in my own searching, is that there are two basic tests for truth. And the first one is what's called the correspondence theory and the coherence theory. Now, those are 50-cent words. Correspondence just means, does a claim that someone makes, does it correspond to reality? In other words, is there a backup for it? Can you back up what someone is saying? Does it correspond to what we see in the world? And the second one, coherence, is again a 50-cent word that just means, does it make sense? So if you make a claim, does it make sense in the laws of logic, in your mind? Does it make sense in light of other things you know? That kind of thing. So if someone makes a claim and you see something on the news or on social media, more likely social media, does it correspond to reality? And can you fact check it? And if you can fact check it, does it now actually make sense in the light of the way the world works? So I think those are the two starting points where we would go for what truth actually is, and in a world where there's so much stuff out there. And we can get into specifics about how do we spot deep fakes, how do we spot fake news and stories that are sensationalized. There's ways to do that too.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. What a great answer. I think one of the things that's tricky is I think we in our society we've bought into this lie. I would say that that's your truth. That's your truth. Well,
Yeah.
if it's true, it's true. Is it not? I mean, that's how I think. I don't think you can live your life based on that being true and this being true if they're if they're different, you know. And so that's a struggle. I think that a lot of people that is confusing a lot of people because, but I'm sensitive to the fact that if you say that, if you say, hey, there's something wrong with that, well, then people get offended. I'm like, hey, I'm just trying to understand. And I'll go to one thing that I'll say real quick is with my own kids, as I was on my own faith journey while they were growing up, because I was raised in a religious home, but I wanted to know what was true, and I always told them, I want to know what's true. I just want to know what's true. I'm not beholden to this particular faith necessarily. I want to, if it's not true, I got to reevaluate and let it go if it doesn't stand up to reality or truth. And so, I'm not some knucklehead that just wants to, follow this because it makes me feel good. I want to know what's true.
Absolutely.
And so I always told them that. So I opened that up for debate with them. Like, hey, if you can prove to me that there's holes in my logic here, I want to, please feel free. But this is where I've landed because I believe it's true.
And I think that stems from the first way you actually discover what truth is to have the humility to be able to say, I want to know what it actually is, rather than just have my ears tickled or my preferences bolstered. A couple things on that quick, Rob, is that for me, for example, I was raised in a religious home as well, but I was raised as a Muslim. And when at some point, and I was very, very adamant about being a Muslim, I thought everyone should be one. But at some point, there came a time when I started to think to myself, do I believe something because I'm supposed to believe it and it's my tradition? Or do I believe it because I know it to be true? And so I began a search, took 9 years. And it doesn't have to take 9 years for people, by the way. It took me 9 years, not because the answers were hard to find. They weren't that hard to find. It took me 9 years because the answers were hard to accept at some point, because I was confronted with the reality that the Christian worldview, as I looked at it, as I began to look at the main claims, like some of the questions we're asking now, like what is truth? How can I know it? Where did I come from? Do I have purpose? What is the meaning of life? And where do we go after we die, if anywhere? The Christian faith began to answer those things intellectually in, I think, a robust way, a beautiful way, not only historically, but philosophically, theologically, even scientifically. And so I was confronted at some point with the fact that the evidence stacking up in favor of the Christian faith was also, in one sense, challenging the traditions I grew up with. And I had to be willing to say, I'm going to go where the truth leads. Now, that's easier to say than it is to do. That's why it took me 9 years. However, I will say this is important for our discussion, is that as uncomfortable as the truth might be to come to, it's always worth it. It's always worth it, even, and sometimes because of the discomfort in looking for the truth. You're always rewarded. I really do believe that you're always rewarded by an earnest and diligent search for the truth. But one other thing I would say is that what you're hitting on is so important for us to recognize that we are currently immersed in what many are calling the post-truth culture. And a post-truth culture is a culture that does not deny that truth exists. We acknowledge that truth exists, but we make it subordinate. We make it less important than our feelings and our preferences. So if the truth happens to line up with my feelings and my preferences, whether they're political or social or religious or whatever it is, well then great. The truth is suddenly on my side. But if it conflicts, well then I kind of hide it, or I ignore it, or I will resort to fake news, or I'll use deep fakes or AI or whatever to bolster my views. It's a human tendency. All of us are prone to it. So we're in a post-truth culture. We acknowledge truth exists, but we make it less important than our feelings and our preferences. And that's where the danger lies, because in a world where there's so many now AI deep fakes, and this is what I write about in the book actually is quite a bit, is that reality begins to collapse in favor of our feelings. And our feelings are not substantial enough, they're not weighty enough to hold up the weight of reality. And so everything collapses. And so we go from a post-truth world to a post-trust world because we don't believe anything we see anymore, because everything can be faked and everything is agenda-driven. That's why this question of how do we know it's true is so important.
Yeah, amen. It's pivotal. I mean, it's huge, because how do you know anything?
Yeah.
You just on a slippery slope to nowhere, trying to figure out. You can't get you gotta. I always like to say, hang your hat on something. I gotta have something that I can. Okay, I got this now. Now I can move to this and move to that based on what from that. But if you don't have that, where do you go? You're just on a slippery slope to nowhere.
Right, and you hang that hat on something that's fixed. It's in a fixed position. The minute it doesn't slide down on the floor the minute you put your hat on it, because it can actually stand up to the weight.
Right. I love that. So one of the things that one of the quotes I always liked, speaking of truth, and again, I want to be sensitive to the fact that not everybody's necessarily a believer that'll be tuning into this, but I do want to, again, have an open conversation about how we arrived maybe at what you believed in and what you believe in. And Jesus did claim to be the truth.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to claim that. It's another thing to actually be it. And so you have to then decide, okay, is he the truth or is he not the truth? And I love the quote from C.S. Lewis from Mere Christianity. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but I'm just going to read it because I think it just is so profound. And I love C.S. Lewis because he is such a great intellect, to help people like me that aren't so much, just like yourself. I get to kind of pick your brain. But C.S. Lewis said, a man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord. and Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to.
Yeah.
And he talks about the trilemma of the Lord, liar, liar, lunatic, or Lord. So he's a liar if he claims to be God and he's not. He's a liar, or he's a lunatic. He's claiming to be God, but he's nuts, or he is actually Lord. And you're kind of left with those three choices from what I get out of it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's one more. It's added to it called the quadrilemma. He's a Lord. He's a Lord, a liar, lunatic, or a legend. In other words, he didn't actually say those things. People just put those words in his mouth, so to speak. And I'm a big fan, by the way, Rob, of making the objection that I'm trying to respond to as hard to respond to as possible. It's called the steel man tactic. You don't set up a straw man and then knock it down and then brag about how you knocked the man down. It was made of straw. Rather, what you do is you take the man, the argument as it were, and you armor it with steel, and then you attack it and see, will it withstand the attack? And if it falls, now you can brag. But before that, you can't. So adding the legend is saying, did he really say these things? And I think the answer is definitely yes. And these are the dilemmas I went through, because as a Muslim, I didn't believe that Jesus claimed to be God. I believed that Jesus existed, and that as a Muslim, I believed he was a prophet of God, born of a virgin, and all these things. But he definitely wasn't God incarnate, and any claim that he was a legend that was later added to his story. So when you attack that issue and you say, okay, I want to address that issue and address that claim, how do you find out what the truth is? Well, this directly applies, by the way, the same method for finding out what the truth directly applies to the way we find truth in our information-saturated world, where there's so many competing claims for everything. One of the first things you need to do is you ask yourself, am I hearing something from the primary source, right from the horse's mouth, or am I getting it second, third, and fourth hand? And I can tell you, as a lawyer, as an attorney who went to law school, practiced litigation, practiced trial work for a lot of years, I know how evidence works and how eyewitness testimony works. And you have to have an eyewitness. Usually more is better than just one, and usually independent eyewitnesses. More than one person who aren't collaborating with each other to cook the story, so to speak. And so what I found was, as I looked at the claims Jesus is making in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four Gospels that make up the New Testament, is that not only are those documents themselves actually independent eyewitness testimony, but there are collections of people whose names we know who readily said that Jesus claimed to be the God of the universe. And very early on, they weren't making this statement like 200 years after Jesus' death. When you look at the New Testament as an example, you can find in the Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the book of Acts, very early evidence for the claims of Jesus. For example, you can set up a timeline. This is what lawyers do. You set up a timeline. You try to say, what is a known fact that no one disputes? Okay, and this is a good way you can establish truth in an information-saturated world. What is something everyone establishes as the truth? No one really disputes this. Right, left, top, down, center, whoever they are. What is that? Well, in the ancient world, the temple was destroyed. The Jewish temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. Now, the New Testament records the life and times of Jesus of Nazareth, and also what happened in the early Jewish Christian church in Jerusalem and in the area. And the most important thing that ever happened to the Jewish people in Israel was the destruction of the temple. So if you were to see a history of what happened significantly in Jerusalem, and it didn't include that destruction of the temple, what would you naturally conclude? That what was written before the destruction of the temple. It'd be like saying, I picked up a history of the city of New York, and I didn't see anything referencing September 11th in it. Well, because it was written no later than September 10th. So you know that. So now you have an established timeline, which means that everything in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the book of Acts was written before 70 AD. Jesus dies in 33 AD. And all of the stuff that's written down, which was passed along orally before that, had to have been earlier than 70 AD. So all the multiple eyewitnesses whose testimonies are recorded, not only in the New Testament but elsewhere, happened before 70 AD, which means it's really early. So we have eyewitnesses, we have more than one, and we have them very early. And I can tell you as a lawyer, that's exactly how you establish a fact in a court of law. And that's what we have with the New Testament.
Wow. We could probably talk about this for a lot longer. I was trying to keep these around 15 minutes, but there's so much here, and then where do you cut it off, right? So I don't know if you had anything else to say to wrap it up. That was very good. I've thought about that, but you have such a knack for kind of keeping things succinct.
Yeah.
But you got so much in there that I got to kind of unpack. I'm
Well,
following your logic.
Yeah.
So.
Well, one thing I could do too is just to like bring it back to the current like advice on stuff today, and how to like and just wrap it up that way in terms of like thinking things through. Is that now we can take that same exact method and apply it to the various claims today. So when you see something online and it looks sensational, or it appeals to the tribal instincts like your party, political party, or your social group, and it makes the other people look like demons almost immediately, ask yourself, is this true or is this biased? And is this playing to my preferences? Is this what I want to hear or is this what I need to hear? Because sometimes we need to make sure that we're checking ourselves, not just those who are talking to us, but our ears. Are we receiving things we want? The next thing I think to do with regard to AI and the deep fakes is find out, is something you're seeing, whether it's a video or an image or whatever, are there multiple sources for that image or that story? Can you find multiple sources for it? And if the answer is no, or it's the same 3 or 4 people sharing it over and over again, well, maybe it's not so true after all, or at least a little on the suspect side. So there are various ways you can do this, and I think checking sources is really important. So gone are the days when you can just trust what you see. You have to look at the sources. But the good news is that when you do that, you'll be rewarded because you'll have a confidence is that what you are reading and what you believe now are actually true. And one thing I want to offer to everybody, if this is okay with you, Rob, is I want to offer a tool that I developed, goes along with my book called Fake ID. It's a truth tool. It's called Spot the Truth, Spot the Lie. It's a guide, a 6-step guide for how you can tell if what you're looking at is true or not. And I can provide a link for how they can download it for free.
Oh, that's amazing. I'd love to have that myself because I would say one thing, and then we'll wrap this up, but you talked about social media too, and how do you one thing I think that's interesting is the algorithm. You know, this whole algorithm gets people in their own little box, and they're being fed. What? So it's that's another thing that we almost have to fight. Of this is what it's determined I want to see, and so I started playing pickleball recently, and I get pickleball videos left and right. Where how did I see this one? I don't know where this even came from, but you can be in your echo chamber, so to speak, where you just continue to feed on something, and ultimately, it doesn't matter for pickleball, but for truth and understanding and trying to figure out why you're here and what your purpose is and stuff. If we're not careful, you can be in your own little echo chamber and kind of reaffirming what you think when really is that really true, which is what we're basically talking about.
And don't forget this, social media is not about telling you what's true. It's about keeping you on the platform so they can sell you stuff, because there's a rule. If the product is free, then the product is you. And what they're doing is taking your data and they're selling it. So don't always disbelieve everything you see in social media, but remember, if they're not out for the truth, they're out for sales.
Yeah, very well said. So awesome. So we'll just wrap this one up, and
well, good.
And I appreciate your time. And so you're going to provide that link for me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks, Abdu, and we'll go on to the next topic.
All right.
I hope that was helpful for you. If you have questions, because like I mentioned in my previous video, sometimes you might get one question answered. Okay, now you have 5 more. So let me know in the comments if you have any more questions that we'd like to address. And we have episode 2 already recorded and episode 3. So, but after that, we can start addressing other questions. So, all right, thanks for watching, and God bless you.
Dad, how do I